All right, today we're going to begin a discussion of Heidegger, and this will be in the way of a general introduction, because the reading selection, an article called On the Essence of Truth, is profoundly difficult reading. Anything in Heidegger is extraordinarily challenging, because what Heidegger is attempting to do is to articulate something which generally hides itself, something which is not given to expression, and that is what he calls being. And it is the same concept of being with which we've been dealing all semester. For Plato, the good is being versus the visible realm, which is in a state of becoming. Aristotle asked, what does it mean to be? And addressed the question teleologically. The modern philosophers wanted to know also, what does it mean to be, but especially how do I know what is? But Heidegger looks at the history of philosophy and charges that while it begins with the question, what is being? What does it mean to be? Which is an ontological question. Ontology is the philosophical inquiry into the meaning of being. Because being, which we'll have to await the discussion of, always reveals itself as the being of a particular kind of being, like the desk as a being, or the earth as a being, or a human being. The ontological question of what it means to be always slides into metaphysics. And I had suggested to you a long time ago that the distinction between ontology and metaphysics, or the investigation into being versus the investigation in reality, is a very subtle one. It is a difficult distinction to articulate. And so Heidegger finds himself having to string together German constructions of words, which is perfectly grammatically correct in German, but not quite so in English. And so the translation into English of Heidegger's German, which is difficult enough in the German, becomes even more foreign sounding, odd. Now, what Heidegger would say is that this is fundamentally because being likes to conceal itself and must conceal itself so that we can have experiences of things. In 1927, Heidegger published his magnum opus, his major work, called Being and Time, in which his guiding question is, again, what does it mean to be? But because he discerns what he calls the forgottenness of being in the history of philosophy, such that what we seek, namely being itself, not the being of this being or that being, but rather being in itself. To put it differently, what we want to know is not what it means to be this or that, but what it means to be at all. Why is there anything rather than nothing? Now, Heidegger's teacher was Edmund Husserl, and Husserl developed a method of philosophical investigation called phenomenology, the phenomenological method. And essentially what this method does is to table the discussion of whether or not things in themselves exist, and simply to attend to the phenomena themselves. And so we begin by describing our experience of the world as it presents itself. The phenomenological motto is, to the things themselves. And by that he does not mean things in themselves in the Kantian sense. He means, let's return to things as they present themselves in our everyday experience, and let them speak for themselves without imposing any theoretical baggage or construct upon those things. And then let us return to that everyday pre-theoretical understanding that we have of the world in an attempt to show how it is possible. Now that should sound familiar to you, because this was Kant's question. How is our experience of the world possible? But Heidegger takes Husserl's phenomenological method and applies it to the ontological question. So Heidegger is asking, what does it mean to be at all? Another way that I could demonstrate the difference between metaphysical questioning and ontological questioning is that as a metaphysician, I ask, what is X? Where I'm interested in knowing what X really is, as opposed to the way it merely appears to be. But as an ontologist, I'm focused on the is. I want to know what gives things to be. What does the isness of things consist of? What makes it possible for there to be anything at all, rather than nothing at all? And his answer, in 1927 anyway, is that the meaning of being is time. Now this again should sound familiar, because Kant said what makes possible the perception of things are the forms of intuition, one of which is inner sense, or time. We can have perceptions of things only because they are formatted in sequence, which is our way of intuiting the world. Heidegger radicalizes what Kant is doing in the Critique of Pure Reason, and is going to maintain that being really is time itself. And in the early Heidegger, time is us. We make it possible for there to be things rather than nothing. Because the way in which human beings exist, or the meaning of human existence, is to be an opening, an open space, a location within which the world arises. By our interaction with things, our naming of things, and the judgments we make about things, we unconceal the world. We uncover it. We let it be. And so because the ontological question, what does it mean to be, gets answered in terms of the being of the human being, Heidegger's analysis is called existential ontological. So the first part of being in time is dedicated to an analysis of the ways in which human beings exist. And he calls these ways of existing existentials, rather than Kant's concepts of the understanding, which make experience possible. Heidegger speaks in terms of ways of being in the world, or modes of being, which he calls existentials. The most fundamental way in which we exist is being in the world. We are always in a world. We exist alongside objects, and we exist always toward our death. And so what we find in Heidegger is really the confluence, the coming together of two major strands of Western philosophy. The onto-theological and the practical dramatic. The focus on metaphysics and the focus on human existence, the psychological. Because there is a world only so far as we bring it forth into presence. We make it possible for things to become present. And what makes that possible is the present. Time. we are presencing beings. We wrench things out of concealment and into the open by our interaction with them. The first thing that we've got to establish in approaching this article on the essence of truth is what Heidegger calls the ontological difference. And it is the distinction between being, such as it appears in the title, Being and Time, which is Sein und Zeit, being and time, where being gets distinguished in English by being spelled with a capital B. But when you see being, capital B, that is a translation of the German Das Sein, being itself. And what that essentially means is presence. To be is to show up, to become present, to announce itself. As opposed to beings, which we designate with a lowercase b, which are things or entities. You're a being, I'm a being, the table is a being, the earth is a being. Okay? But what Heidegger ultimately seeks here is not what it means to be this being or that being, but what it means to be at all. Now, of course, the difficulty in answering this question is that everything that we can talk about is in being. So there is nothing against which to distinguish it. As my mentor, Michael Zimmerman, put it, it's like walking into a blue room. Everything's blue. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, the furniture, the people, all the same shade of blue. And then being asked to show me what blue is. Where do you point? Everything is blue. Well, anything that we can think about is in being. So how do I distinguish it? How do I indicate what it is to be? Because to be is to be in time. And time is in us, or even more radically, we simply are time. Again, the first part of being in time is devoted to an analysis of human existence. Okay? Now, here's something that I must caution you about. Existence is used in a very special way by Heidegger. Only human beings exist. Tables are, the earth is, the light, the computer, the desk, these things are. They are real, He's not saying that these things are just imaginary. They are in being. They're real things, but they do not exist. Because to exist, for Heidegger, means to stand open, or to open oneself for the manifestation of the being of things. Now, different things have different modes of being. For example, the chalk or a hammer. These are tools. And the way that they announce themselves or present themselves is what Heidegger calls ready at hand. Their being consists in being ready to be used, usefulness, as opposed to, let's say, a bare thing, like a clod of dirt in the middle of the sidewalk, which he would call simply present at hand. But we exist. And he supposes that the word existence comes from the Latin existere, which literally means outstanding, or to stand out. To exist means to stand out in the open, or better yet, to become the opening within which the world can become present. Now, we can exist in a way that lets the meaning of human being show itself. And he calls that authentic existence. The German is Eigentlichkeit, which literally means owning oneself. When I own my existence, or my being, when I own up to my being, then I take responsibility for the fact that I alone am responsible for letting possibilities for my life be. But when I attempt to disown my being, to blame others for not seizing upon possibilities for my life, or if I hide out in the anonymity of the everyday world, what Heidegger calls average everydayness, then I am not truly myself. I am the anyone, the they. You know, we say things like, they say it's going to rain this weekend. Or they say this and they say that. Well, who is the they? It's the everyone and the no one. It disburdens me of responsibility. Now, he doesn't mean authenticity and inauthenticity as moral evaluative terms. it is natural for us to fluctuate between authentic and inauthentic existence. And proximally, and for the most part, we exist in inauthentic everydayness, as we must. We have obligations. We move from responsibility to responsibility. We live according to clock time. But what triggers the shift into an authentic moment of existence, wherein I resolve upon the possibilities for my life, is when I actively anticipate my own death.
So does that go along like the Socratic theme of unexamined life?
Of course. Everything goes back to Socrates. But that's a very good analysis. You might say that those who prefer or opt to remain in the cave
Is living inauthentically.
yes, have found comfort and security in the anonymity of the everyday interpretation of things. But and of course, we all know we're going to die. We expect it. But we don't actively anticipate it. So usually it requires some kind of crisis or an event, like a near-death experience, or something that stops your momentum, for you to realize, to have a real encounter with your own mortality. And it's at that moment when we become resolute. And you hear people say, boy, it's like I've been given a second chance. I'm really going to live now. To be authentic is to resolve upon the possibilities that lay ahead of that one possibility which cannot be avoided, my own death. And so, to answer the question of what it means to be requires an analysis of the way that human beings exist in the world. But the word he uses for the human being remains untranslated. It is Dasein, which is itself a German construction of two words. Okay? Da means here or there. Okay? And we've seen that Sein means being. So, human being, or Dasein, is being here and being there. We are here, there, and everywhere. We have a savvy, a know-how. We know how to get around the world. But for the most part, we flee toward entities and into anonymity so that we can avoid the angst, the anxiety of being individualized down to ourselves. Because when that happens, we feel uncanny or not at home. We feel alienated, in a sense, from our world. And in that moment, which Heidegger calls the moment of vision, I realize that I alone am responsible for the possibilities open to me. Okay? Now, the more open I am, and hopefully without sounding trite, the more open-minded I am, or the less dogmatic I am, the more I can detach from my grip on things and unexamined ways of living and thinking, as Socrates said, then my world opens up, and there are worlds upon worlds. They're everywhere. But for the most part, we live in the world of everyday understanding. We understand things the way that they understand them. Heidegger literally calls that self, or that mode of being human, das Man, the they self, or the anyone self. And when I really become fixated on something, when I become obsessed with something or someone, then my world shrinks. And everything shows up in terms of that one thing.
It's an Eastern philosophy.
Yes, absolutely. There is a very Eastern mystical element in Heidegger's thought. Yes.
Well, just my opinion. If God's essence is existence, is he basically saying that we exist because God exists? And is it possible that he's saying that this is also a transcendental idea?
Heidegger would reverse that. And he would say that God is. He wouldn't say God exists, okay? Because if God is a real entity, which of course Heidegger doesn't know, then God makes things actual. He creates the actual world. But only finite beings make things possible. God has no possibilities.
This is very strongly from just the vantage point of a human being. Like things are because we've made them be.
Yes,
So
we
that
let
would
them be.
So that would be like a das Man concept, a they self, and oneself.
What would be?
The idea of that, since it's
Sure. You know, we can hide out in the idea that
in Heidegger's.
a guy, it doesn't matter really what I do, because eventually a savior is going to come along to make it all right. Okay? Now, Heidegger rejected being called an existentialist because for him, we do have an essence, but our essence is to exist. What it means to be a human being is to let things be. Now, there is a play on words there. What I mean by letting things be is letting them enter into presence, to present themselves. When I pick up the piece of chalk and use it, I let it show itself for itself. I let the meaning of the thing come forth. Okay? When it just lays there, and if I had never encountered such a thing before, then its meaning remains concealed. But here's the problem, what he calls the forgottenness of being. When we are actively engaged with things in the world, that which makes them possible, the being of those things, which is time, gets covered up. When I am engaged with, when I'm using the tool, when I'm sitting in the chair, what reveals itself conceals something else. When the chair comes into my awareness, then the space within which the chair exists disappears because it's filled up. Now, in the same way, in everyday existence, we fill ourselves up with this and that. And so becoming authentic is also, and this is another very Eastern Buddhist idea, emptying oneself.
Self-forgetting again?
Hmm?
Are you saying self-forgetting? Like self-forgetting?
Sure, yeah. Forgetting oneself. Although, when we talked about it in
You
Socrates,
said you kind of die.
the problem was self-forgetting, okay? We forget who we are, but of course, as for Socrates, becoming wise, which I suppose in Heidegger would almost be the same thing as becoming authentic, requires the sort of dismantling of the ego. Okay? Emptying myself like wringing out a sponge so that I am open for new possibilities.
Get rid of all your hang-ups.
Sure. And when, when I have those moments of what he calls anticipatory resoluteness, the anticipation of my death, which makes the resolution to be what I already am, namely the condition of the possibility of there being anything at all, I feel anxiety, exposure. I feel out of place. I don't feel grounded anymore. But that's where we ought to be. Because for the most part, on an everyday basis, we consider the world to be a settled affair. We've got things figured out. There's nothing new under the sun. But when I realized that, in fact, there are countless possibilities that have yet to be uncovered, and that I alone can let those possibilities come forth into the present, this is a moment of horror. existential horror. I alone am responsible for what becomes of me, and I can either own up to it, in which case I let the meaning of being human show itself, where the meaning of being human is letting be, or I cover it up. I displace responsibility here and there.
Was Heidegger agnostic? What is
Heidegger actually was in the seminary. He dropped out, okay? But, Heidegger is... For the most part, Heidegger follows Kant, okay, in not dealing with the transcendental. Because we are the beings that make things possible, and that's what it means to transcend. But especially in the later Heidegger of the 40s and 50s, he says things like, only a God can save us now. Okay? But of course, by that, he doesn't mean necessarily, a supreme being. He means something to reawaken our sense of purpose.
Like Superman.
Yeah, like he's just Superman. That's right. Exactly. And Heidegger interprets Nietzsche as already reawakening the question of being. So what Heidegger wants to do is sort of reappropriate the history of philosophy to overcome this forgetfulness of being. But the forgottenness of being is not just an error, okay? It is a necessary event. Because, again, time does not show itself. When we reveal things by using them, by naming them, thinking about them, that revealing at the same time is a concealing of the structures that make the revelation possible. Okay? Now he follows Kierkegaard in this. And this is really quite remarkable. That Heidegger makes one reference to Kierkegaard in Being in Time. But he owes a heck of a lot more than that to him. The whole idea of truth as appropriation. For Heidegger, truth means uncovering or unconcealment. It is an event. So he uses the Greek term, aletheia, which we've seen before, uncovering. Truth is letting be, uncovering something. And in the later Heidegger, this uncovering really focuses on the act of creation. When I create, I uncover possibilities. All right. Now, the article is called On the Essence of Truth. What is truth at bottom? And at the end of the article, he concludes that the essence of truth is the truth of essence. The essence of truth is the uncovering of the essence of existence. Letting unconcealment itself enter into the open. I think of this moment of vision that he talks about in Being in Time as like a moment of highly charged, vivid perception where, just things are alive with, just pulsating with their presence, where you almost can see the presencing itself. All right, so again, I caution you that this article is scholarship of the highest order, okay? So it's going to be very difficult. But try to read it. Do your best with it. And, if you want, you can also read the other article that I uploaded, which is, it takes the name Existence and Being, okay? Which is quite a bit easier, but still difficult. But I'm going to put together a set of lecture notes for the Essence of Truth article this weekend, okay? And we'll start to take it apart, piece by piece, on Tuesday, and, hopefully be able to review on Thursday and then take quiz number 10 toward the end of class, okay? But over the weekend, you got to prepare for your SART quiz and try to read the Heidegger article.
Are the SART lecture notes online?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're on there.
And remember, next week is the last week of class, except for Monday, Wednesday classes, which meet for the last time next Monday, okay, on the 5th. So any quizzes that you have not completed, you have to get done. Make arrangements or just come see me in my office hours to do so, okay? All right.